This is just call the management committee meeting for August 25th to order. It is about 2 p.m. The Metropolitan Chair has determined that it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Accordingly, committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or other electronic means, and the meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 at the date and time just mentioned prior. We encourage you to monitor the meeting remotely. If you have any comments, we encourage members of the public to email us at public.info@met.state.mn.us, and we'll respond to your comments in a timely manner. With that, can we call the roll to confirm we have quorum, please?
Barber.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Muse. Ferguson.
Here.
Thank you.
And I don't know if did you call Councilmember Lee's name? I thought I saw him pop in. So.
Oh, I apologize. Lee.
Here. Sorry, I just came in late.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we have quorum. Are there any adjustments to the agenda that we have? All right, seeing none, we'll move to approval of the minutes of the August 11th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Lilligren moves approval.
Moved by Lilligren. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Seconded by Johnson. Are there any changes or corrections? Discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank
The
you.
motion carries. We have a number of business items on the agenda today and then a few information items. So our first business item is business item 2021-211, a labor agreement with the Law Enforcement Labor Services, Inc., Local 192, part-time police officers. Marcy?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. Yes, we have a tentative agreement with Law Enforcement Labor Services, LELS, specifically our part-time police officers. This is a group of intermittent part-time officers who supplement our full-time police force. They are all employed by other law enforcement agencies around the metro area and do additional extra work for us as needed. Their contract expired on December 31st, 2020. It represents currently the group about 60 employees. We reached a tentative agreement on July 28th, 2021, and it was ratified by the membership on August 17. The settlement with the part-time police officers actually in their labor agreement, it states that their wages will follow the compensation of the full-time officers. So the increase in year one of the agreement is 2%, year two, 2%, and year three, 2.5%, which of course is the pattern that we've established with all of our non-grid groups. I think I mentioned it's a 3-year agreement effective January 1 of this year and set to expire December 31st of 2023. The Thrive Lens analysis for our labor agreements under stewardship, it's a settlement that falls within the financial parameters established by the council, and under prosperity, we believe it represents a fair and reasonable settlement for our employees and demonstrates our commitment to investment in our employees. And the proposed action today is the authorization for the regional administrator to enter into an agreement with LELS Local 192 part-time police effective for January 1, 2021 through December 31, 2023.
Thank you. Are there any questions on business item 2021-211? All right, none. Is there a motion to approve business 2021-1 labor agreement with law enforcement labor services, local 19 part-time police officers.
Moved by Barber.
By Barbara, is there a second?
Second by Lee.
Moved by Barbara, seconded by Lee. Any other discussion? All right, seeing, can we call the roll, please?
Barber.
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion carries. Our second business item we've been working on for a while, and that is business item 21-219, a labor agreement, with the Amalgamated Transit Union, local N05, Marcy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. The council reached a tentative agreement in July with ATU. Is a bargaining unit that covers approximately 2,200 employees at transit. Is a wall-to-wall unit that covers both essential or higher profile jobs like bus operator and mechanics, but also covers other kinds of customer service jobs, clerical workers across Metro Transit. The agreement, as you know, expired on July 31, 2020. We reached a tentative agreement for a 3-year deal that was recommended by the ATU board and ratified by the membership on August 16, 2021. The outline of the settlement includes a 2% wage increase in year 1, a 2% wage increase in year 2, and 2.5% in year 3. We also agreed to a one-time lump sum or recognition payment of $1,000 per eligible employee in the bargaining unit. The agreement also includes some other, we think, significant changes for employees, including expanding or moving up the eligibility for new employees for health insurance coverage. We've increased some sick leave accruals for part-time employees in the bargaining unit. We've codified some language on providing administrative leave following traumatic events experienced by our employees, and we have increases in there for safety equipment, I think are some of the major highlights. Under the Thrive Lens analysis, again, stewardship falls within the financial parameters established by the council, and under prosperity, a fair and reasonable wage settlement for our employees. The requested action today is authorization for the regional administrator to enter into a 3-year labor agreement with ATU Local 1005, effective August 1st, 2020 through July 31st, 2023.
Thank you.
If you have any questions.
Any questions for the presenter? No questions? I would just want to take this moment just to thank you, Marcy and Mary and the team, Wes. I've just, it's over the finish line. It always seems a challenging process, and so I think we had a fair agreement, and I think it really took a lot of time and effort and work on one's part to make it happen. So it's great that we got a good agreement, and hopefully our employees are happy with the agreement as well, and we'll have to work together for the next 3 years in peace and harmony. So thank you for that. With that, is there a motion to approve business item 2021-219?
Moved by Barber.
All right, moved by Barber. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Moved by Barber, seconded by Gonzalez. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, let's call the roll, please.
Barber.
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, and the motion carries. Our next business item that we have is business item 2021-220, 2021-218, Metropolitan Council Policy 334, Travel and Meeting Reimbursement Policy. Marie?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Marie Henderson, the acting CFO, and I'm here to present business item 2021-218, Metropolitan Council Policy 3-3-4, the Travel and Meeting Reimbursement Policy. This policy is designed to reimburse employees for authorized travel and meeting expenses while performing council business. This policy defines what is reimbursable by referencing the council's resolution number 2016-26 resolution that authorizes expenditures of public funds in accordance with the public purpose doctrine and the IRS as parameters for allowable expenses. This policy was first created in 2010. The key changes to this policy since then include to make a clear policy. In 2010, documentation was both a policy and a procedure. So we divided the policy into one for local travel and out of area travel and making two clear procedures. We have made definitions clearer. We've created a procedure for local travel that is understandable with examples for mileage and parking reimbursements. We've created a procedure for out of area travel, including how to book travel, correct documentation for conferences, and what is covered for meals, lodging, and a list of what is reimbursable for business related expenses, and a list of what is non reimbursable expenses. We've added resources, council resolutions, and links to this procedure. We've also utilized the new policy and procedure template. This policy was reviewed by end users, the legal team, communications, and our policy and procedure review team. As the majority of our reviewers agreed to this policy and procedure, there was discussion around other issues. But since they didn't comply with tax code or were not subject, and they subject the council to increased risks, those ideas were not moved forward. The Thrive lenses include stewardship, the use of public financial resources to be used effectively and efficiently across the council, and accountability to ensure policies and procedures are effective by providing clear and easy accessible information. There is no additional funding for this policy as needed. So, Mr. Chair, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve changes to the Metropolitan Council Policy 3-3-4 Travel and Meeting Reimbursement Policy.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the travel and reimbursement policy? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just curious if a review or this new iteration of these policies came out of the results of the issues and pressures that we felt because of the pandemic, and or how has the pandemic kind of helped shape this policy. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair and committee members, this policy has been in the works for a couple of years. It was put on pause because of the pandemic. So we looked at what the state is doing. We looked at guidelines for other resources, including even the University of Minnesota. Those examples are very similar. Our guidelines are within the IRS also. And the need to bring this forward now is as employees are working from home and wondering what is reimbursable if they need to come into the office, in particularly like commuter miles, and is their home office eligible? The answer is no, the home office is not eligible. We are still employees of an employer, and by IRS rules, we still have an office. And so commuter mileage still comes into play here. So it's just important to have the clear expectations to the employees through the pandemic and after.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or discussion? All right, is there a motion to approve business item 2021-218, Metropolitan Council Policy 334, Travel and Meeting Reimbursement Policy?
Johnson moves.
All right, moved by Johnson. Is there a second?
Lilligren
Second by-
seconds.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Tim.
Oh,
All right,
Lilligren seconds.
moved by Johnson, seconded by Lilligren. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Gonzalez.
Looks like he's having some technical
Okay.
difficulties.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye. And the motion carries.
And Gonzalez is aye.
Thank you.
Gonzalez is an aye. Thank you. All right, our last business item that we have on the agenda today is business item 2021-228, commitment to reducing barriers and increasing opportunities for targeted group businesses and veteran-owned small businesses. Jody?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Jody Jacoby, and I'm the director of the procurement department. And I'm really excited to be with you today to present this business item to adopt a resolution to express the council's commitment to not only reducing barriers, but increasing opportunities for small targeted group businesses and veteran-owned small businesses who participate in the Metropolitan Council's underutilized business, as we know, otherwise referred to as MCUB, by directing staff to utilize the tools and the best practices that are available to them, including implementing a 6% preference in the amount of the bid for the good or service. This is permitted by Minnesota state statute, again, allowing the council to award up to a 6% preference for goods and services to small targeted group businesses and veteran-owned businesses. And in order to participate, a small group business must be registered as an MCUB. This preference is another tool in our tool case that the council is taking a stance on to implement and proactively promote inclusive contracting outcomes. This preference is currently used by the state of Minnesota and other public agencies, including the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul, and Hennepin County. The target implementation date is October, and procurement is actively working on following the approval of this resolution on preparing for this change, including updating our standard templates, and then working with the Office of Equal Opportunity and our communications department to educate both our internal customers and vendors. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this resolution.
Are there any questions or comments from anybody?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jody, for the presentation you're working, for all of your team's work on this. And I just really want to lift up the work that you've been doing, the work, the leadership of the chair and the BIPOC work group as well. And when you work within these large institutions, you push, you push, you push, and sometimes a little movement is a lot of progress. And I think this is a great step. I look forward to seeing what the results of taking this step are and how we can build on the work. So I just wanted to voice my gratitude to all y'all for this work and my support for this action. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. I just want to second what Robert said. You guys have been doing such really great work, and everybody on this team does, and the efforts are not going unnoticed. So thanks for your impact, and thanks for all the things you bring to us so we can keep moving ahead. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? All right, is there a motion to approve business item 2021-228?
Moved by Lee.
All right, moved by Lee. Is there a second?
Second by Lilligren.
All right, moved by Lee, seconded by Lilligren. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
I think Councilmember Gonzalez was back in for a second. He's back out. So, all right, thank you. The motion carries. We have two information items, or yes, three information items for today. The first information item is the second quarter financial report. Marie and team.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. I am Marie Henderson, acting CFO, and with me here today is Ed Petrie, the Director of Finance for Metro Transit, Ned Smith, the Director of Finance for Environmental Services, and Nick Hendricks, the Manager in Budget for CD and MTS. We're here today to present the 2021 second quarter financial report. We can go to the next slide. The first slide is a summary of our operating reserve balances, and per policy 3-8 target fund balance, the policy's purpose is to promote reasonable financial management for each operating fund. A target fund balance is intended to help the operating fund units meet cash flow needs and to ensure adequate protection for unanticipated events. This helps with risk management for the council, and the bond council likes to see healthy reserve amounts. The targets are intended to be benchmarks and not absolute. On this slide, you can see that all divisions at the end of 2021 are projected to be at or above their target reserve balances. This gives us a great overall picture between the minimum target fund balance compared to the projected available year-end reserve fund balance. And each area will talk a little bit more about their balances. Next slide. The general fund dollars are our most flexible dollars, and the dollars spent in the general fund fit the mission of the council and can be used for targeted one-time use projects. Revenues from the general fund are primarily from property taxes. Those taxes are recorded in July and December, not showing a lot of results current year to date, that's why. And revenues are expected to come in on budget. For 2021, the general fund, the budget was developed with an increase of reserves of 1.7 million. And this was mainly due to those one-time use of the general fund projects that we were setting up and have set up in 2021. Expenses are right on track for budget at the end of the quarter. However, we'll remember that IT expenses are heavier in the third and fourth quarter of the year. And this is mainly due to the contract commitments and when they come due. The available ending reserve balance is projected to be around 21.9 million. And the assigned committed reserve balance is 5.3 million. And we can go to the next slide. And just to remind you of what those amounts are with our self-insurance compensated absences and our regional water supply program. And now for the next slide, I'll turn it over to Ned Smith for environmental services. Thank you.
Ned, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Yes, if we could get to the next slide, please, for environmental services. Sorry for the mute. There we go. Thank you. So good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Ned Smith. I am the Director of Pretreatment and Finance for Environmental Services. On our review, starting with revenues, we are expecting to be 0.2 million under our revenue budget. This is due to a few offsetting pieces. The largest one is our investment earnings, where we are expected to come in 1 million under budget, due mostly to lower interest rates impacting short-term and long-term investments. But this is partially offset by some increases such as our state appropriations revenue, where we are expecting to be 0.5 million over budget. This is due to timing for water supply planning, where we set our appropriation revenue equal to our planned expense and adjust as actual appropriations arrive. In addition, the recently announced water demand reduction appropriation is for $675,000 in 2021 and 2022, which is higher than in previous years and in our budget. Finally, other revenue is expected to be about $300,000 under budget, and that's driven by FEMA revenue for, $300,000 over budget, which is driven by FEMA revenue for flooding in 2019, as well as asset sales such as selling old used equipment or trucks from our fleet, and that's coming in a little higher than expected. On the expense side, we are expecting to be $1.2 million over budget. This is driven by a few pieces, starting with salaries and benefits, where we are expecting to be 1.3 million under budget, mostly due to higher number of vacancies than budgeted, as well as medical plans that are running a bit under budget. They're cheaper than we thought. We also plan to come in 0.8 million under budget in chemicals. This underrun is driven by activated carbon, which is used for odor control. Specifically, the price of activated carbon is less than we expected, and we are finding that when we do our capital project upgrades to replace odor control equipment, the capital infrastructure includes the first round of carbon, which means you don't need to purchase quite as much in the first year. As our budget manager likes to call it, think about when you buy a Brita filter, it comes with the first filter already included. These underruns are offset by materials and supplies, where we plan to run 2.5 million over budget in 2021. And this overrun is driven primarily by inflationary increases in the cost of materials that we're seeing across the economy. We also expect to overrun consulting and contract services due to property and flood insurance increases of about 500,000, and that's due to general industry trends in the insurance industry, and about 300,000 over for HVAC work that we're doing to protect our workers in the new COVID environment. Other over and underruns are offsetting and driven by our budget for special projects. We have about 2.5 million sitting in our other operating expense for special projects, such as electrical PMs, product maintenance, planned maintenances. And we are forecasting to spend those project funds primarily in contract services and capital outlay. We just haven't moved the budget dollars yet. We do that later in the year when we get a better picture for how the plants are coming in on their budgets. In terms of reserves, given these projected variances, we are planning to end the year with a $3.4 million decrease in our operating reserves compared to a $2 million budgeted decrease. This will decrease the operating fund down to 28.2 million, which is well above the year-end target of 13.7 million. We will continue to monitor our expense trends to determine if a budget amendment is needed in Q3 2021. Next slide, please. In terms of SAC, we're seeing some good, strong, healthy SAC numbers. We're actually up 19% through May for year-over-year SAC performance. What's encouraging here is the strength continues in our residential, but we're also seeing some rebound in our commercial SAC, which is also up 19% to last year. For now, to be conservative, we've put our forecast at 20,000 units. We'll probably come in a little higher than that, but it doesn't really impact our operating expense or revenue. It just that goes into our SAC reserve, which leads me to our next slide, please. So our SAC reserve balance continues to be very healthy. You can see we ended the year in 2020 at about 119 million. That's versus a target reserve of about 55 million. So we are more than double. We do see a slight decrease in the reserve, and that's because we're using some of our reserve to pay for our pay-as-you-go expenses, where we use operating funds where we otherwise would have used financing to pay for capital projects. And with that, that concludes our second quarter readout for environmental services, and I think we'll take questions at the end. So I will turn it on to the next slide, please, which I believe is Nick.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Nick Henriksen, Budget Manager for CD and MTS. Overall, HRA revenues are projected to be 800,000 under budget. We are currently under budget by 1.2 million on federal housing voucher revenue as a result of fewer vouchers being issued and slower growth in rental rates. This is partially offset by federal funds received as part of the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, and these additional federal funding will be amended into the budget later in 2021. Expenses are projected to be favorable to budget by 1.8 million. The primary driver for the favorable variance is lower estimated housing voucher payments. and a decrease in contracted services and travel expense due to COVID-19 are also contributing to the favorable variance. And again, additional emergency housing voucher expense will be amended into the budget later in 2021. As far as the reserve balance, our projected reserve balance for HRA is 14.3 million, which is above the council minimum reserve target balance of 7.1 million. Next slide, please. Metro mobility revenue are slightly favorable to budget. Additional federal COVID relief revenue will be amended into the budget later this year. Total expenses are projected to be 3.2 million favorable to budget due to lower contracted services and savings in fuel costs. The projected ending reserve balance is 19.8 million for 2021, which is above the council's minimum reserve target balance of 9.3 million. And with that, I can turn it over to Ed Petrie.
Good morning, Chair and Committee members, or good afternoon, Chair and Committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance, Metro Transit. I'll go through the motor vehicle sales tax slide, then I'll go through the Metro Transit family of services. First of all, motor vehicle sales tax revenues have been performing very well this year. In summary, the Metropolitan Council's net monthly auto receipts in June were $32.9 million. This represents about a 0.9% decrease from the previous month, but a 3.2% increase from last year, which was at $31.9 million. Statewide motor vehicle sales taxes year to date, based on the February 21 forecast, are running at about just over 112% of what the February forecast was. So as a result, we have been seeing good motor vehicle sales tax receipts in calendar year 21. Next slide, please. So how that translates for the council then is what you'll notice is on the motor vehicle sales tax reserves. Reserve balances, our target forecast reserve balance should have been about $30.7 million. As a result of running at about 112%, we actually have a reserve balance in at $47.9 million. If you recall with motor vehicle sales tax, due to the volatility of this revenue source, the council budgets 95% of the state forecast. Any receipts in excess of the 95% will then go into the motor vehicle sales tax reserve to be used for the next year transit operations. So reserve balances at the end of June were very good, and once again at 47.9 million versus our original target at 30.7. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll first talk about Metro Transit budget, bus operations. The 2021, the amended budget had a budgeted use of reserves of about $137 million. We're forecast to use about $125 million this year. So we're about $11.7 million positive variance. If you recall, in 2020, the council made the decisions to pull in a large amount of CARES money, build our reserves, and we're now using those reserves now in calendar year 2021 operations. Overall, within operations, passenger fares are expected to be about $3.6 million below the budgeted number. But one of the things that we're watching very closely, though, is passenger fares ridership. We have seen, like, for example, for the month of June, we compare ourselves to the prior year, the month of June, our ridership was about 349,000 rides on bus, or 24% higher than 1 year ago. And what we've seen is basically for the months of April through July, the post-pandemic period, every single month our ridership has been growing and is exceeding the prior year levels. So that's one of the things that we're very hopeful on, but we're also cautious and watching very closely. On the operating expense side, we had an operating amendment budget of just over $323 million. We expect to come in about just over $15 million under that piece on the expenses. The main savings are due to savings in open positions. We've talked about in the past about the number of operator positions we have open. We also have openings in maintenance, our mechanics, and admin. So we'll save about $11.5 million is what our forecasted savings right now is on salaries and benefits. We're also forecasting that we'll save about $1.6 million in fuel and about $1 million in parts and supplies. So overall, this would bring our ending reserve balance to just under $62 million versus a council target of 29. So we are very healthy with what we had anticipated. Next slide. So now I'll move us on to the light rail operations. Light rail operations originally has a balanced budget for 2021. You'll notice the number, we're very close. We're forecasting that we're going to beat the budget by $36,000. So we're basically right on top of the 2021 forecasted budget. We are noticing that passenger fares are down slightly from 1 year ago with revenues, but there again for the period of April through July, we're noticing increases in ridership again on both blue and the green line. For the month of June, for example, blue line was up about 133% over the prior year. Green line is up 107% from the prior year. So for the period of April through July, we are seeing continued increases on blue and green, just like we saw on bus. But once again, we're very cautious. We're watching this very closely on all of our lines. We're also watching it very closely to see what happens, after Labor Day, to see what happens with ridership trends, and what passengers will do. Overall, on the operating expense side, we're about $2.5 million under budget. We have about $4 million forecasted savings in labor and benefits due to open positions. But on the flip side, as a result of not running 100% service, we've been doing a lot more maintenance on our trains and catching up on some of our deferred maintenance. Our materials and supplies are expected to be about $1.2 million over budget as a result of our additional maintenance. But overall, expenses will come in about $2.5 million under budget, with the positive reserve of about $36,000. That'll give us an ending reserve balance of just over $13 million versus a council target of 7.1. Next slide. So I'll move into the last slide. This is commuter rail operations, our North Star line. The North Star had an amended budget, balanced budget of 0, and we're forecasting we should hit a positive surplus of about $630,000 during the year. As with the other lines, passenger fares are expected to be under budget due to a decrease in ridership. But even North Star, we are actually seeing some increases in ridership, not as big, but for example, for the month of June, our ridership in the month of June was 4,320 rides. Last year it was 1,579. So it's a 2,700 ride increase, 173%, but it's still not at our normal levels where we should be running about 50,000 rides on North Star on a monthly basis. But we're continuing again though to watch North Star rides very closely as the rides slowly come back. And if you think about North Star rides also, North Star is a very express-oriented type of ridership. It's people mainly coming to and from work. So once again, we're going to watch to see what happens in downtown Minneapolis and see after Labor Day what impact, hopeful, positive impact it'll have on North Star. Overall expenses are about $900,000 below budget. We're seeing salaries in both labor and benefits and consulting costs. So with the result, we're forecasting a positive surplus of just over $600,000. Our beginning balance was about $7.5 million in reserves, brings us down to $8.2 million versus a target of $947,000. So with that, next slide. Okay, that was the last slide. So Chair Committee members, I believe we would be open for any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? And if you have any, just speak up, as we're having some power issues here in Eden Prairie.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead. Sorry.
this is Councilmember Johnson. My question, first of all, thank you very much for this work, considering all of the things that we've been through. There's some real encouraging signs within all of this, so that's good. Can I ask a question though on our reserves? So we have our target, and in many cases here we have some very healthy reserves, and I know we have to keep an eye out on the out years, right? But do we ever hit a top line reserve amount where we are going beyond what we would consider, since we're so far past a target amount, that we would change policy or do something different when we, I don't know, too much in a reserve account?
I guess Chair Committee members, I guess I can speak from a transportation perspective. One of the ones you probably noticed, for example, is around, like, for example, Metro Transit bus operations. We're forecasting to have reserves of about $62 million versus a target of 29. So we are quite a ways ahead of reserves. But one of the things that we do also within the transportation family, as we've talked about previously, is that we actually do what's called a toolbox forecast. We forecast our operations for the next 4 years. So one of the things that we're watching very closely, we look at reserve balances because as you would think about reserves, reserves are one-time funds for one-time uses. So one of the things we're looking at, not only operations, we're looking at ridership, we're looking at the use of the federal relief money. With all those funds like we presented within our operating budget presentation, we feel as of this point in time, we have enough funding, combinations, reserves, federal funds, and ridership projections, motor vehicle sales tax projections to take us through about mid-year 2025. So, you know, if a person didn't really know the backstory, you would think, wow, $62 million in reserves is really in excess of the 29 million. Is that really necessary? But once you understand the full forecast that we're having to monitor, it's one of the components that we're using to balance our transit operations through mid-year 25.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Barber, you had a question?
Mr. Chair, I
I
think there's
think
a,
that Ned had a response to.
yeah.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Barber and Councilmember Johnson and Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would, I'm not sure if we can pull it up, but if you remember seeing the SAC reserve balance as well as the SAC units, I'm sure that's another one where you're thinking, boy, that looks high. We don't usually look back 20 years, but we like to, in this case, to show back to 2002 down through 2010 when the severe recession hit. And you can see how quickly a SAC reserve balance can plummet. So we do have quite a bit now. We are trying to use some of that, though, to help out with rate relief and rate mitigation. So we're using $8 to $10 million per year from that reserve. Very carefully, there's some strict rules about where we can and cannot spend that SAC money. So we're making sure it is for the capacity, the empty capacity portion of the system. But we are also, it can diminish very quickly, and we are trying to manage that a little bit. I'm out. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair and committee members, I do want to also remind you for the general fund. Last year, we just settled for the one-time equity initiatives, and we do have about $3 million for the 2022 budget to use those reserves for those one-time projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate that. And in asking the question, I think I knew the answer, but I also know that when reserves build up, and I'm hoping the legislature and everybody else understands that this is a long-term play, obviously, in the work that we're doing regionally, so that they, you know, don't have that impression just off of, you know, maybe a slide or two that they're checking in on with us. So that context is very, very helpful.
Thank you
And
very
hopefully
much.
everybody else knows that that's not extra money that we just have sitting around that doesn't have plans for it.
Mr. Chair and council members, I will say that you do have some flexibility in the general fund. So Marie mentioned some uses that we have for it, and this year in the 22 budget, we targeted the general purpose levy. But if there are other priorities that the council is interested in, I do think there's a little bit of room in the general fund reserve balance if the council has some kind of shovel-ready projects to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on that question?
I'm not seeing any
Hearing none.
others.
Councilmember Barber, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these are both for Ed. He's not going to be surprised because of the questions that I asked related to the 2022 budget in Transportation Committee. And so I think it's important for everyone else to hear his answers, and he's very good answers for it. But the first one has to do with MVEST. So the question that I asked relative to MVEST is, are we watching for or anticipating changes in MVEST right now due to limited availability of cars due to the international chip shortage is the first one.
Chair, committee members, thank you very much for the question, Councilmember Barber. Yeah, that's one of the things like we're watching very closely. Like when we looked at the motor vehicle sales tax, when the forecast came out or the results came out in June, when we're still seeing that we're 3% higher than a year ago, we were very surprised by that. But that is one of the motor vehicle sales tax. When we talk about risk for the transportation division, one of the biggest risks we have, other than ridership now, is motor vehicle sales tax. Very volatile. We're hearing about all these manufacturers not able to manufacture their vehicles and or sell their vehicles because they have no chips. So that is one of the things that we're watching very, very closely. And every month we're watching those results very closely. We're looking back at our budget results. We're also looking at our 4-year toolbox results to say, is that changing any of our parameters? So we're ready to respond to that. But that is definitely one of the risks, the highlighted risks that we pointed out in the 2022 budget.
Thank you, Ed. So then the next question I had is related to North Star. So for my fellow council members, the counties participate or provide some funding for our operations for North Stars. We have not received the payments from Anoka County. And so how could that affect our operating budget as we move into 2022?
Yeah, Chair Barber, thank you very much. Chair committee members, as Councilmember Barber mentioned, we have a multi-year master funding agreement with respect to counties, whether it's Anoka County or Hennepin County. Then we have the annual agreements with Sherburne County and MnDOT, Minnesota Transportation. But with our county agreements with Hennepin County and Anoka County, Hennepin County has signed their agreement on North Star. They have paid us through calendar 2020, and they are current. We bill on quarterly installments. Hennepin County has paid us for both first quarter and second quarter of 2021. Anoka County, we have a signed grant agreement with them for calendar year 2020. They have paid us for first and second quarter of 2020. We have received no funding from Anoka County since July 1st of 2020. So they owe us between what we forecasted they should pay us through the balance of 2020 and the first 2 quarters of 2021 in excess of $5 million. So that's one of the things that we're watching very closely. We have forecasted and budgeted now. Our forecast assumes that we will receive payment from Hennepin County. Our 2022 budget also assumes that Hennepin County will, Anoka County, I mean. It assumes that we will receive payments for Anoka County through calendar 21. It also assumes that Anoka County will pay in 2022 consistent with their signed master operations funding agreement. But if they don't pay, that's where the reserves fall into place. We right now are forecasting that we would have enough in reserves without the Hennepin County, or excuse me, without the Anoka County payment to get us through sometime late fourth quarter of 2021. At that point in time, we will then fall below the council's reserve balance, and then we will then would have to come back to the management committee and council and get approval if we choose to go negative cash, because council policy allows you to go negative up to 3 months, not to exceed $10 million. So some decisions may have to be made by the council that if Anoka County does not come forward, pay their arrears balance from 2020 and pay 2021 and move into 2022, we will run out of funding for North Star.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Ed, how far out is that running out of funding part?
Chair committee members, right now we're currently forecasting late 2024 or late 2021 or sometime like the first month of 2022 before we'd have to come back to the council to get approval to go into a negative cash balance. Because as you notice, North Star did have a significant reserve balance, and with that, and because we're still continuing to get Sherburne County, state of Minnesota, and Hennepin County, along with our reserve balance, we have enough to carry ourselves through to that point in time.
Okay. Any other questions, Councilmember Barber?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the budget update? If you have them speak up, I can kind of see hands, but I don't see any. So, any other questions on the budget update? All right, not seeing any, then we'll move on to our next information item that we have on the, I'm just going to find my spot here, but I think it's, sorry, our next information item around our reserve balances, sorry, for our setting our rates for next year's healthcare programs, right? Councilor Johnson, if you could just maybe help me out on just who the person is. I find the agenda here on my phone.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Chair, I move that this,
No, we don't need to move. It's just an
I'm sorry.
information item. So, yeah.
We're on item 2.
Yes.
So the annual
Item 2.
self-insurance report rate setting. It's Marcy Simon.
Oh, are you
Marcy,
asking me
yeah.
to take over for the
Sorry.
meeting, Mr. Chair? I'm sorry, I'm lost.
No, we're good. Marcy, if you could just go to the next
Thank you. I
business item
apologize.
and do the rate setting, that's fine.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm Marcy Cordes, Chief Labor Relations Officer. I'm here on behalf of Marcy Simon, HR Director, as well as with Marie Henderson, Acting CFO. Go ahead and present information on our 2020 year-end claims report for our self-insured medical plan, as well as the 2022 premium rate recommendations. And I think that I start, Marie. Greg, if you could move to the next slide. We have a series of slides that will review our plan costs for year 2020. This first slide shows what our budgeted to actual plan expenditures were for that year. As you can see, we've got utilization that comes in on medical. I think it's about 12% under the budgeted amount of $77.3 million. The budget does include, as noted on the top, both our health claims as well as administrative fees and our stop loss premium. You can see that we also came in under budget on on dental, about 20%. As you may have already surmised, we think this is primarily attributable to the experience of COVID, and we've got a little more detail in some of the next slides. Greg, if you could move to the next, thank you. This slide presents the information as incurred claims per member per month on both medical and pharmacy. You can see that we have a separate trend line for 2019, 2020, and 2021. The red line that you see through the 2021 trend line represents our benefits consultants projection moving forward for the rest of 2021. As you can see on the 2020 trend line, we've got a big dip attributable to COVID beginning in the spring of last year. And you can also see as well, I think, a corresponding increase in essentially the same 3-month period in 2021. And we think this increase is attributed to what I'm sure were many deferred elective treatments from 2020 when we really couldn't get elective care during COVID, as well as some expenditures due to COVID testing and COVID treatment. You can see also with our 2021 trend line, Ann's projections, I think, show fairly consistent expenditures with what is a typical increase at the end that we often see as people reach their deductibles and they're out of pocket maximums. It's a great incentive to get some care in before the end of the plan year. Greg, next slide, please. Thank you. This is the same information essentially as the previous slide, but it shows us a specific breakdown in pharmacy versus medical over the 3 years. You can see that we did not see a decrease in prescription use in 2020, which also is certainly understandable given that you don't need an in-person office visit to get a prescription usually. And prescription costs continue to be a driver overall and increased costs in our health plan, and that's part of the 2021 projection as well. Greg? Some key points looking at our medical claims. A reminder that we did have a 0% increase in our premiums for 2020. We thought that was a nice, really consistent opportunity, consistent with COVID as well. And we were certainly, I was glad we were able to offer that to our employees. Obviously, COVID has had a big impact on our overall claims over the last couple of years. Our top claims diagnosis are provided to us year to year, and they tend to be the same for cancer and orthopedic conditions. We do also track large claims. In 2020, we had 100 claims over 100,000 for a total of 18.8 million. In 2019, we had 85 claims over 100,000 for a total of 15.1 million. And our pharmacy claims, we do see again that trend from 2019 to 2020 of a 3% increase. And our top pharmacy drug classes also remain the same for chronic inflammatory disease, autoimmune disorders, as well as diabetes treatment. This next slide shows our incurred claims for 2020, and it also shows 2019 and our 2021 trend line with the same projection that Anne starts in May of 2021. And again, you can see a rather large drop in utilization during some of the COVID months last year. We do have this, I should note, a more even trend line for utilization for 2021 on that previous slide. And I think that's really due to the fact that, the dental insurance operates a little bit differently, and there is a cap or a greater limitation on what the total benefit for the year is, which is different than our medical plans. Thanks, Greg. We could move to slide 5. And again, this is another articulation of our total incurred claims. This is on a per member per month basis for our dental plan. And you can see we've got a corresponding dip as well as an increase expectation for 2021 that gets us back on par with where we were in 2019. We do find over the course of looking year to year on our dental plan that we generally don't see a lot of major increases in utilization. And with that, I will turn it over to Marie to talk about our premium increases for 2022.
Thank you, Marcy, and good afternoon again, everyone. Marie Henderson, and I am going to talk about the premium rate recommendation for 2022. As we come into our fall open enrollment period, we are presenting this to the Management Committee for your general concurrence with our recommended premium rates for our self-insurance plans. We do have rate setting principles that I will run through and want to focus on that we need our total premium revenues that are needed to cover our expected costs of the program. It is a math exercise done by actuarials, so it may be looking like simple math, but it is not. And I will also remind this committee that the rate setting does not consider what the split is between employer and employee share of the premium, as that is part of the bargaining agreements and labor strategy. So like I said, it's math. We utilize an actuarial to calculate our estimated plan costs. A lot of assumptions that go into the actuarial uses and calculation of the projected plan costs. This year it included the COVID-19 impacts. What is the system impact overall vaccines and testing and direct COVID costs and deferring of care of that returning. Claim experience over the last 24 months are also analyzed with medical trend rates, pharmacy rebates, and administrative costs. The actuarials utilize multiple experience periods and limit potential volatility in the rate projects or projections from year to year. Also, the actuarial uses judgment to apply to determine the weighted ranges of past years and to account for emerging experiences. We've used a 60% 2 years prior and a 40% for the prior year, so 2 years back and 1 year back, has been utilized at the Met Council for the past few years. This was adjusted to an 80-20 in the 2021 rate projection to account for the lower 2020 utilization rate. So when we look at this slide, the projected cost with all of that included is premiums at $80 million. So the expected cost to be covered is 76.2. This does represent a 5.1% increase over 2020 rates. So next slide. Do you want to remind the committee we have 3 plans, medical plans. We have open access that is for ATU membership only. And then we do have distinctions and empowered HRA plans that are open to all employees. The HRA contributions for the council for contributions were 3.4 million into the HRA account for the high deductible plan in 2021. So let's look at the next slide where it's our rate setting principles. And the first one is that our total premium must ensure that the risk is shared by those enrollees that are in the same plan choices. So for example, if you're in open access, the costs will be covered by all those in the open access plan. Distinctions and HRA are combined into these 2 plans. So if we take a look at the next slide, this slide takes the total gap of the spending, which is our funding, which is 5.1%, and it's 5.6% for open access. And when we combine distinctions and HRA, it's 4.8%. So the next slide is our second principle, which premiums for each individual plan should be evaluated annually and calibrated to the projected claim expense of the plan. This review includes, and we need to consider actuarial value of the plan benefits, which distinctions is about 6% richer in the plan benefits than HRA, but the council also contributes into the HRA plan, and that cost is not in this, the 3.5 is not in this actuarial report. Like I said, we need to consider the HRA costs of the council to include in this. So when we look at that and we go to the next slide, then the gap for the second principle remains the same after those evaluations have been done for this year. Open access is still at 5.6 and distinctions and HRA at 4.8. So if we go to the next slide, just wanted to remind you very quickly of what our rates were in 2021. As Marcy pointed out, those were the same rates in 2020. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to add in the 2022 rate in the proposal here. So the 5.1% increase for open access is increasing single by coverage by $66 and family by $164. Distinctions for single, $44 and family $109, and HRA single for $29 and family for $71. And let's go to the next slide and talk about the third principle, and that is reviewing the risks and the reserves. The reserves are to be used to cover for cash flow and monthly variability between the premiums and the claims. They mitigate uninsured losses for claims expecting premiums, and we also have insurance coverage for stop loss. The reserves are not to be used to cover the premiums in the plan. So let's go to the next slide. This information then leads us to the third principle of the minimum reserve target balance should be maintained. Again, mitigate the risk of unanticipated gaps between the premium collected and our claims. We need to mitigate the risk of migration among plans and avoid significant year-to-year premium fluctuations. This is after the first principle is met when the expenses stay within the plan. We can, with the authorization of the council, to use one-time uses with priority to use the uses that mitigate future claim costs. Sorry. So let's look at the reserve balance for medical, and that's on the next slide. We have set a target of 25 to 35% because we are self-insured, and because of the low claims last year, we do have a higher reserve this year, 46% above that target. The last slide is also dental, and it shows it at 90%, but I will caution you to say $500,000 up to that 5 million. It doesn't take long for claims in dental to go well above that target. So I've gone really quickly through the rate setting, and believe we're just looking for concurrence of understanding of how we set our rates and setting those for the 2022 year. Any questions?
Any questions from council members? Or concerns, I guess?
Yeah,
With the...
Mr. Chair, it's
Go ahead, Councilman Logan.
yeah, thanks, appreciate it, and thanks, Marcy, for stepping in to pinch hit, and thanks, Marie. Excuse me. So I just have a question about process and sort of authorities, and so we saw the rate setting exercise in the math, and I can imagine it, that the work the actuaries do it is not easy math at all. But I'm just wondering then, how are the rates set? Is that something that's done administratively, or will this come back to us at some point? Yeah, so how does that happen?
So, Mr. Chair and committee members, we are looking for the concurrence to understand that it's the 5% increase. And once it's my understanding that this is not a business item, it's just concurrent. And then this amount will be used for open enrollment, and then Marcy will use that for the labor strategy for figuring out the employer and employee. But I'm guessing that Mary has a better
Yep, she has her
explanation.
hand up. I don't think the chair can see it, but you are
Mr.
correct, Marie.
Mr. Chair and committee members, back when we went to the self-insured model, we set policy that talks about how we set the rates, and so that's when we established the rates need to cover the costs, and we can't rely on the reserve to be able to cover costs because that just means that we're delaying the cost to a future year, and so that's why we just asked for concurrence in this meeting. And then I'll also say that most of our employer rates are already set in our contracts. And we continue to
sure.
negotiate those as we go along to kind of we're kind of trying to move to that share of 80-20 for family and 90-10, I think it is for singles. We're not very close in most of our contracts, closer in some than others. But in the ATU contract, actually, we're right on target for that 80-20. 90-10, but those are already set in contracts.
Great, thanks very much, very helpful. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, this is
Any other
Councilmember Johnson. Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, again, I know we're setting the rate. We're not talking about how those rates are shared, although you just referenced a few where we're trying to hit our goals or not. So could you just explain to me too about the council putting some funds into the HRA plan a little bit? if I took my notes correctly on that. Is that, what is the goal that we're doing that for?
Yes, Mr. Chair and committee members, that is the high deductible plan. And so that's the matching rate as the employee would have to pay in for the deductible. Then the council matches that. I'm guessing, and Mary can probably get this a little bit better because I'm watching it on the screen. I'm guessing there's the incentive to get the employees to go to that high deductible plan.
And thank you. I think, because I remember doing something very similar at the city of Plymouth. So Mary, thanks. Come jump in and clarify. And then how is that working as far as incentivizing people to jump to that plan?
So, Mr. Chair and committee members, I will confirm that is an incentive to go to a plan that has our lowest total premium cost. And so that's why, and that's negotiated as well, that amount that we put in. And then I'm going to look to Marcy to see what kind of movement we've had over the last several years into both the distinctions and the HRA plan.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, without specifics, I can say that, we generally see, frankly, a pretty slow movement or a migration out of specifically open access into the high deductible plan. We could certainly provide more specifics, but given the differences in premium amounts, we're often surprised at how slow the migration is, but we do see something occurring every year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just one quick follow-up. And what percentage across the council is not negotiated as far as the split of the rates go? Is everything negotiated with different individuals, or are there non-union groups that just, this is what we offer at the council? How does that split work?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, the vast majority of splits have been negotiated with the bargaining units that represent the vast majority of our employees. We don't negotiate those that are represented in the non-rep plan, and I think that's somewhere between 300 and 350 employees. So we go through a process of setting those contributions, those rates every year, and we'll do that shortly in the fall.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? So I guess the question for us is there concurrence with the philosophy and the rate, the 5% increase that's been recommended?
Yes.
Yes, Councilman Johnson agrees.
Anybody disagree with the process and the proposed rate increase?
No, Councilmember Barber agrees.
Okay. Councilmember Lee or Councilmember Gonzalez, are you still with us?
Yeah, Councilmember Lee concurs as well.
Okay, I think then we have concurrence, and I think staff can move ahead with their plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have one more information item on the agenda. Councilor Johnson, do you have a motion for me?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this meeting be closed to the public pursuant to Minnesota statute sections 13D05 subdivision 3B and applicable case law, so that the committee can discuss with our legal counsel in a confidential setting attorney-client privilege matters.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Lilligren seconds.
It has been seconded by Lilligren, moved by Johnson, seconded by Lilligren. And just wanted to note for the public, a public body with a majority vote in a public meeting may decide to hold a closed meeting under section 13D-R.05 subdivision 3B of Minnesota open meeting law to discuss attorney-client privilege matters. Discussing the litigation matters in a confidential setting will permit council to engage in candid discussions and resolve these matters in a way that benefits the council and the public. Discussions during the closed portion of this meeting to discuss attorney-client matters will be confined to pending litigation matters listed in the committee agenda. Can we get a motion, or sorry, a vote on the motion to close the meeting, please? Roll call.
Barber,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye,
Thank you.
and the motion carries. Thank you. Before we close the meeting to discuss the pending litigation, I would like to inform members of the public that we are monitoring the meeting and for the record that the committee will adjourn immediately after the discussion of this information item, and that the committee will not have any discussions or conduct any business after the information item is complete. For the record, please note that we are closing this meeting to the public at 3:16 p.m. on August 25th, 2021. Do we have the right people in the meeting?